Coming up next is part two of this very important topic, focusing on millennials in the workplace with a case study from AT&T's Hardmon Williams. Hardmon is the AT&T Vice President of AT&T Believes and Community Engagement. He is also an INROADS alum.
Andrew, thanks so much for that insightful presentation and helping us think about how millennials really put their arms around the work. But let me just first say, I'm thrilled to be here. Name is Hardmon Williams, and I'm with AT&T, and I'm just so thankful and grateful to Forrest and the INROADS leadership team for inviting me here for this iconic milestone, which is the INROADS 50th. I've had the benefit of being a part of the INROADS family for over 30 years. I was an intern back in the early to late 80s and had the opportunity to join AT&T as a part of INROADS and haven't looked back. So I'm here today because I was given the opportunity to talk about how AT&T is thinking about communities and being disruptively innovative. I'm super proud to have been given an opportunity to lead our community work. We're a Fortune 8 company, but at our heart, we are the 240,000 plus employees that help us manifest good in these communities. So I'm thrilled to talk to you today about AT&T Believes, and I look forward to the conversation. So let me start with a little bit of context, and I'm going to do it in the form of a story. Chicago, Illinois, one of the most tremendous cities in the country. I had the honor of living there for 10 years. This was the innovative birthplace of AT&T Believes. We've been in these communities for over 100 years, but these employees back in the third quarter of 2018 took a very entrepreneurial approach to community activation. These employees took a very, very different approach and boldly stepped forward and said, the most essential and germane issue for us as employees is the neighborhood violence that we're seeing in the south side of Chicago. And so for them, they narrowed that lens and said, look, let's come together with collaborators in the community who have a core competency in this work. Let's marry our employees to that effort and do something that is fairly material in those markets. The point was, they live in those communities, they work in those communities, and as such, they really felt that they wanted to believe in that community. And thus, the notion of AT&T Believes was born in what was then Believe Chicago. So this model that our employees in Chicago came up with in Believe Chicago caught fire, and other communities across the country started to really get engaged. We are now a modern media company, and we have lots of assets through Warner that are in Los Angeles. The Los Angeles employee base said, we want Believe LA to be about helping youth who are interested in media, and so they built Believe LA to improve diversity in front of the camera and behind the camera. And then if you look at where we are in our headquarters in Dallas, Believe Dallas is all about mitigating homelessness. And the notion of that came from the fact that we are investing in a brand new campus in downtown Dallas. And so the Dallas team really galvanized around homeless mitigation and have partnered with many, many different homeless service providers here in the Dallas area to try to provide a positive impact in that work. Finally, the work was so credible domestically that our international employees became excited and engaged around AT&T Believes. And so as 2019 finished, we had some 35 plus what we call Believe franchises, all with their own unique focus and charter. And we moved into 2020, and our international teams continued to clamor for their opportunity to participate in this model. And we were just able to launch internationally in Believe Czech Republic and Slovakia. And so those two countries came together, and we're so excited now that the brand has a credible presence internationally in Central Europe. We entered 2020 with great aspirations. Then, like the rest of the world, were hit with this unprecedented pandemic. And when you look inside of this pandemic and look at the disproportionate impact it had on people of color, we felt like we needed to step forward. And so all of the AT&T Believes franchises kind of coalesced and came together to try to provide services and support to communities during this unprecedented pandemic. The second big step in 2020, which was clearly something that we had not anticipated, was what happened when all of our franchises saw the unfortunate and really difficult situations of racial inequity in communities, especially as it relates to what we saw with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and others. And once again, all of our franchises came together to have a very cohesive approach. And on July 30th, we were very proud that we announced $10 million in contributions for underserved, for Black and brown communities. About $5.5 million of those dollars will go through AT&T Believes, through collaborators that we work with in these markets to help these communities heal and to help grow financial literacy for our youth, to help provide paths for career readiness, and for small businesses trying to get back to a place of vitality. We're offering opportunities for them to get access to capital. So we're super pleased that in spite of what was an extraordinarily challenging situation from the pandemic to then these circumstances of racial inequality, AT&T Believes was elastic enough, it was disruptive enough, it was entrepreneurial enough where it could step in and make a difference in both of these circumstances. So as we were navigating this difficult situation that was 2020, we had to look at a disruptive, innovative way for our employees to become involved. Clearly, they could not go into communities physically and engage in the way that they had done before. And so our team really thought about this and came together and put together a whole new platform of virtual approaches that they can use to engage in communities. And they thought about it along a wide continuum of activities, whether there was a light touch version of just digitally engaging with our communities, like writing a note online to underserved students in various communities, and or a really more immersive model that we built last year called AT&T Believes at Home, where it really mimics the sort of engagement and interaction that you'd have at a physical volunteer location. So we're super proud that we now have virtual as a second business model for volunteering, and we think that that disruption really was a landmark for how we'll think about engaging communities going forward. So I mentioned earlier our work here in the headquarters in Dallas and how it's focused on trying to mitigate some of the impacts of homelessness. Candidly, if you look at the statistics around homelessness, it's growing more than any of us would ever want to tolerate. It's grown almost 300% here in Dallas over the last few years. And more troubling is if you look inside of those statistics and the populace that's being impacted by homelessness, nearly 70% of them are Black here in Dallas. And that certainly didn't sit well with us. And so we really wanted to do something about it. And so we talked about this formula of having a specific cause or charter, bringing in collaborators that can help you with this disruptive model, and then bringing our employees in to make a difference. And so if you apply that particular algorithm to what we've done in Believe Dallas, we worked with one of the homeless solution providers here named Our Calling. And the head of Our Calling is a wonderful, wonderful person who's technically a technologist by trade. And they had a fairly simple app that they had released to help curate services for the homeless community. They came to us and said, "You're a technology company. We'd love to elevate the app and refine it such that it is more useful and productive for those suffering from homelessness." And so we turned to our millennial employees, and they stepped forward in a big, big way. And so we had a team of technologists who came together in a very, very short period of time. These great young employees literally coded a brand new app platform, got it released in both app ecosystems, and now you've got an opportunity for Our Calling where that app platform is being used globally. It's being open sourced and people can provide input to service locations all around the globe for the purposes of helping and mitigating homelessness. And so that's a great example of how you can bring forward the power and the intensity of our millennial employees and how they made a really, really important impact to the homeless situation that we see here in Dallas. So in close, I'm super excited that AT&T Believes can stand as a framework for disruptive social good. But at the same time, my personal reflections on this role have been immense. I grew up in the inner city, saw many of these challenges that these communities see, had the great fortune of being involved with organizations like INROADS to help provide me development and candidly give me an aspiration for a place that I wouldn't typically have seen where I was growing up. And so for me, this has been an extraordinary opportunity for me to provide some reciprocity back to communities that are being impacted negatively in a similar way in which I saw as a young person. So as I look forward to what the Believe brand will do here going forward, it's also an opportunity for me to invest personally into making impact in these communities of color. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my story, share the disruptive approach that we're trying to take with AT&T Believes. Congratulations to INROADS on 50 years, and I wish you all a great event.
Thank you, Hardmon, for bringing us the inside story of AT&T Believes. It's time to take an in-depth look at the racial wealth gap. First up is Adam Davids, a Fulbright scholar who has studied INROADS and its impact on this gap. Adam is the Director of Learning for CareerTrackers, an organization operating on the INROADS model and founded in Australia.
My name is Adam Davids, and I'm here to celebrate INROADS' 50th anniversary from Australia and shed light on the long-term impact the program has made in America and around the world. I'm a proud Aboriginal Australian, a descendant of the Wiradjuri people, Fulbright scholar, and Director of Learning at CareerTrackers, which is a non-profit that creates internships for Aboriginal university students in Australia, founded by an African-American man and INROADS alumni, Michael Combs. Why is an Australian speaking in an INROADS event? Well, there are two reasons. The impact of INROADS has transcended space, time, and cultures. And I'm going to share a first-hand testimony about how the internship model is benefiting Aboriginal people in Australia. I'm also here to showcase the research I conducted as a Fulbright scholar on the INROADS program in 2019, and the findings that lead me to believe that the program holds an important key to closing America's racial wealth gap. There is an abundance of evidence that shows how racial wealth inequality in America is getting worse. And unless we identify the programs that can demonstrate an ability to empower minority people to build intergenerational wealth and bring key sectors together to participate in these programs, we may be having the same conversations in 50 years from today. Minority people in America are not experiencing economic injustices alone. Aboriginal Australians face economic vulnerability that other Australians do not. Our public and private sectors struggle with diversity, and Aboriginal people have been subject to decades of failed government policy. Growing up as a young Aboriginal boy in Australia, I often wondered why we as Indigenous Australians resonate so strongly with the struggle of minority people in America. It wasn't until the very beginning of my Fulbright exchange, while I was sitting in the office of the Obama Foundation in Chicago, where I more deeply realized that our people share a particular bond because of two common features between our nations. The first, our nations share a racist foundation that systemically stacked the game against our people. And the second, our nations share a society underpinned by democratic capitalist ideals. These two features have resulted in a giant maze to navigate for historically marginalized people like ours that were only recently granted access. Before I dive into the impact of INROADS, it's very important for me to pay respect to those people that for more than a century have built nonprofits and institutions that serve minority people with a vision to helping them find prosperity in this maze. I've admired the incredible work many NGOs have done over a long period of time in America. And I'm driven to build bridges between like-minded minority-serving organizations all around the world. I think about HBCUs and the phenomenal institutions like Spelman that epitomize excellence, the Hispanic Scholarship Fund and UNCF, the Urban League and the NAACP. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge the Aboriginal people of America, whose thousands of years of custodianship and wisdom enabled the many luxuries that can be enjoyed in the USA. Now let's talk about racial wealth inequality. And just to be clear, when I'm referring to wealth, not income. Wealth meaning the total net value of someone's assets minus their debts, liquid and illiquid. Federal Reserve data shows that household wealth of Black families has remained stagnant for decades, whilst on average, white families have benefited from the longest economic expansion in American history. Business Insider reported on this to have reached an aggregated total wealth of approximately $102 trillion for white families and $6 trillion for Black families. Now let's factor in education. The St. Louis Federal Reserve found that between 1989 and 2016, the median wealth of white households whose head was college degree educated went up from approximately $235,000 to $370,000. Meanwhile, the median wealth of a Black family whose head was also college educated went down from $73,000 to $61,000. This means that even with a college degree, a white family is likely to have 6 times more wealth than that of a Black family. It's important that I call out the fact that these inequities faced by Black Americans are also being faced by Hispanic and Native Americans. McKinsey reports that racial wealth inequality is constraining the US economy and will cost more than $1 trillion between 2019 and 2028. McKinsey also found that for every 10 Black Americans that were born into the middle class, only 3 will remain. There's clearly work to do. Now let's talk about the case in point, INROADS. Many of us know INROADS as the pioneering internship program for minority people that was born in the aftermath of the civil rights movement. An organization with unparalleled track record of developing executive talent from within the minority community. whilst I'd love to centre this talk around the incredible talent that for the past 50 years has taken America and the world by storm because of INROADS, I want us to view the impact of this organisation through a slightly different lens. As an outsider to America, I've listened carefully to the words of the civil rights leaders and their calling for economic justice that is just as relevant today as it was in the 1960s. I was made aware that Martin Luther King III argued that INROADS should be credited for helping build the black middle class of America. I decided to make King's words somewhat of my hypothesis. Could INROADS hold the key to racial wealth equality? Is there any program, or non-profit for that matter, that can quantify their impact on racial wealth equality? When I looked, I found nothing. I was mostly pointed towards policy solutions as the only answer, as opposed to programs. Courageously, INROADS granted me permission to do an independent pilot study to see if the program could bear any claim to contributing to racial wealth equality. In analysing the wealth attainment, income, and home ownership rate of INROADS alumni, I screened 1,000 randomly selected individuals and found an average age of 44 years and an unprecedented economic impact that challenges that notion that policy change is the only solution to closing the racial wealth gap. For example, the Fair Housing Act was enacted in 1968 and sought to boost black home ownership rates in the US by removing housing discrimination based on race. However, after nearly 50 years, the rate of black home ownership had actually fallen, going from 42% in 1970 to 41% in 2017. In my study, I found that 76% of INROADS alumni own at least one property, and therefore providing a platform for intergenerational wealth creation. I found that 47% attain wealth in the range of 100,000 to 500,000, and more than 40% attain wealth in the 500,000 to 5 million range. The rate of INROADS alumni wealth attainment in the 500,000 to 5 million range is in stark contrast to the 37% of white college-educated households and 10% of black college-educated households. The final piece of data that I found was that 57% of INROADS alumni have incomes in the range of $50,000 to $100,000, and 34% with incomes exceeding $100,000. McKinsey extrapolated these findings and recently presented at the Black Economic Forum that if the impact of INROADS was scaled across all black households, it would equate to $755 billion in wealth. Following these findings, I've come to believe that in order to cultivate intergenerational wealth creation for minority people, we have to invest in programs such as INROADS that not only creates access to opportunities, but also helps train and prepare people to take advantage of those opportunities. I'd like to now share the extended impact of INROADS around the world. In Australia, the fact is that there's never been an Aboriginal C-suite leader of a major corporation, which inspired the establishment of CareerTrackers for Indigenous Australians, a non-profit modelled after INROADS that is now in its 10th year. CareerTrackers has graduated 1,000 Indigenous students whose average starting salary is $62,000 a year, compared to Australia's national average of $54,000 a year. The organisation is based on the same philosophy of INROADS that leverages an innovative internship model and a program that helps students to navigate through their studies, a professional job, and build a network with their peers and industry leaders. Sadly, only 47% of Indigenous students in Australia who start a university degree make it to graduation. However, CareerTrackers has demonstrated 89% of its students completing their studies as a result of the internship program, ongoing mentorship, and leadership training. The early signs of CareerTrackers' impact in Australia were noticed by other marginalised communities and inspired the development of Tuputoa, for Māori and Pacific Islander university students in New Zealand. Career Seekers for asylum seekers and refugees in Australia. In 2018, we were invited by the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea to prepare the next generation of young leaders from remote communities across the island nation through the same innovative internship program in partnership with the business community. INROADS, Father Frank Carr, all of its current and former staff, employment partners, universities, parents, and alumni that have served the organisation are true pioneers. The model has truly proven to transcend space, time, and cultures. And we in Australia are grateful for what you have done for the past 50 years. I end my talk by saying that whilst the business demand for talent may fluctuate from time to time, the moral demand for economic justice remains a constant, which means that diversity professionals should expand their view towards minority talent beyond a recruitment effort, but also towards the advancement of families, communities, and the nation. Programs like INROADS aren't funded by taxpayers. Instead, they pay an incredible dividend to society through the success of their students. They give better odds to minorities in securing a sustainable job, a professional job, a good income, and opportunities to build intergenerational wealth. I encourage the INROADS community and other like-minded programs to deepen your search for impact and consider the role you play towards building intergenerational wealth. I look forward to seeing further analysis on INROADS alumni to include their families, descendants, and their combined wealth trajectory. I'm honoured that we at CareerTrackers get to be a partner in the legacy established by INROADS. Together we can find equity and equality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam, for your story and research findings.
This is Brother Cornell West.
I'm Byron Allen.
I'm Melanie Parker.
My name is Erica Alexander.
Hi, I'm Dr. Yusuf Salam.
I'm Corey DeBrouwer.
My name is John Porter.
This is Akala.
I am Professor Linda Hill.
Hello, my name is Malika Saad-Assar.
Hi, I'm E.B. Zaboy.
Yo, my name is Dr. Andrew Jolivet.
I'm Adam Goods.
I'm Benita Stewart.
My name is Sharice Torres.
My name is Kamal Bob.
I'm Nina Goswami.
My name is Nicole Hannah-Jones.
My name is Ibram X. Kendi.
Join us in the search for racial equity.
Now for part 2 of the Wealth Matters segment. Please meet Shelley Stewart III, who is a partner at McKinsey & Company, and also an INROADS alum.
Hello, my name is Shelley Stewart III. I'm a partner with McKinsey & Company, and among several things, I lead our Institute for Black Economic Mobility. I am also a proud alumnus of the INROADS program. I have the privilege of discussing work my firm has been doing on the racial wealth gap and creating communities of action. Thank you in advance for your time and attention. We will cover 3 things today. The first is how current events may exacerbate the racial wealth gap. The second, we'll take a look at the historical context covering efforts towards accelerating Black economic mobility. And lastly, we'll look forward and talk about evolving into a community of action. To set the context, my colleagues and I have done some work to try to assess the economic cost of the racial wealth gap today in the US. We found that by 2028, the US will be foregoing $1 to $1.5 trillion of GDP due to this wealth inequity. That translates to around $11,000 to $12,000 of GDP per capita. This is a large sum of economic output that would benefit the whole economy, particularly in a moment like the one we're in right now. In thinking about how do we address the wealth gap, we thought it necessary to get pretty granular to understand the barriers and sources of the wealth gap. We broke it into 4 stages. The first is community context. These are the public assets and institutional arrangements that are embedded within place, where we live. These are things like educational systems and the quality of public services. And it's been well documented that there are lots of inequality that exists in these things. The second is family wealth. This is about private assets and business development. So home ownership, business ownership, real drivers of wealth. And again, we know that historically there's been significant barriers along a number of these areas. Third is family income. That's actually where INROADS specifically plays, as well as in earlier parts of the journey. This is all about human development and employability, educational attainment, professional advancement, and income inequality. And these are also areas where we have tremendous opportunity for improvement. Lastly is family savings. This is about resource management and wealth building. How do we take that income we earn over a lifetime, translate it into wealth, and most importantly, lower economic volatility over time? There is no doubt that the upheavals that are going on in 2020 have disproportionately impacted the Black community. It's been widely reported. If we layer it into our wealth stages, there are a few things I'd cite. In the community context, we know that 13% of the population is Black. However, 22% of COVID deaths are Black, and this has a lot to do with place and the resources or lack thereof in certain communities. On the family wealth side, we know that Black and other minority businesses are particularly vulnerable to COVID-19 disruption due to the sectors that many of these businesses operate in, disproportionately impacted. Family income, 40% of Black jobs are at risk in 2020. Jobs are at risk for all Americans. Black Americans in particular have a higher percentage of at-risk jobs. And lastly, family savings, this ability to weather economic volatility. Black families on average have only 5 days of income saved, making it incredibly difficult to deal with furloughs and layoffs and prolonged unemployment. If we go back to the inequities and what it means for the health outcomes, we find that there is this disproportionately high risk of severe illness and death from COVID-19. And there are a number of factors, socioeconomic, clinical health, quality of care, and experience. And we really looked at a set of indicators that would help us to understand were certain groups more vulnerable. And if you look at the factors that increase vulnerability, severe housing issues, unemployment, incarceration rate, poverty levels, food insecurity, neighborhood stress, Black Americans over-indexed on all of these different indicators, suggesting substantially higher risk of death and severe illness from this virus. So in addition to the neighborhood conditions where folks live, increasing the vulnerability, there are some other factors that are worth mentioning. One is the increased risk of exposure. Overall, 20% of workers in low-wage, high-contact essential jobs are Black, the top three being psychiatric aides, orderlies, and nursing assistants. Many of these folks remain on the front lines of this crisis in jobs that are low-wage, have high contact, and therefore high risk of exposure to the virus. We also have seen, from a testing perspective, that there are some inequities that are emerging. For example, Black Americans were more likely to try to get tested for the COVID-19 virus, but had a significantly lower success rate. And we know also, and it's been widely covered, that the comorbid conditions are significantly higher in the Black community, stemming from some of the socioeconomic issues that we've discussed. In fact, Black Americans have a 30% higher likelihood of having a chronic condition that will exacerbate the impacts of COVID-19. The other issue that we're discussing as a society is the disproportionate outcomes of the criminal justice system. We know that these interactions with the criminal justice system have damaging effects on employment, child custody, finances. Today, 40% of the US correctional population is Black, despite being only 13% of the population. We know that Black men get 1.2 times the sentence on average when compared to white men when convicted of the same crime. And that Black women have 2 times the imprisonment rate of white women in the US. Again, all of these things have damaging implications for financial wherewithal. So coming back to crisis and thinking about COVID and how we might expect different groups to rebound and recover from this crisis, we can look to the financial crisis for some indication of what we might expect. In 2009 to 2011, from a recovery perspective, Black home equity grew at a significantly lower rate when compared to white home equity value, and shrunk significantly more from 2007 to 2009. So larger on the downswing, slower on the upswing. And this pattern holds true, and if anything, is more magnified for non-home equity wealth in the Black population. This is a call to action as we move towards hopefully what is near the end of this COVID-19 crisis, and activate to ensure that we have an even recovery that all groups participate in. I'm going to talk a little bit now about looking back over the rich history of people engaged in trying to address Black socioeconomic development. I won't hit everything here, but there's a celebrated history that goes back to the founding of many of our historically Black colleges and universities, many legacy civil rights organizations, NAACP, the Urban League, who are still in existence today and really pioneered the fight in many of these areas. Certainly the civil rights area, there's emergence of more organizations and civil rights groups to champion these causes. And then this wave in the 90s and the present, and I would say INROADS is a part of that, which was all about activating this landscape around economic empowerment and a number of things on the education side, on the financial resources side, affinity organizations in academia, whether it be the National Black MBA Association or NSBE, all organizations that have contributed so much to this cause. We're also seeing today the private sector get activated around racial equity. We've seen a tremendous outpouring from Fortune 500 companies making commitments on racial justice. 51% of the Fortune 500 companies made statements. 33% made concrete commitments. Over $6.8 billion have been contributed, or committed rather, to racial equity in the wake of George Floyd and a number of other events that we've recently experienced. We see compelling examples in the social, public, and private sector targeting specific journeys, specific areas. INROADS is certainly one of the shining examples of this, as has been discussed and will continue to be discussed as part of this session. Creating opportunities to get talented minority youth into business early, preparing them for leadership role, and then supporting them throughout their development and networking early in their career journey. Self-help credit unions are a great example of getting financial access to products and services to underbanked, low-income, and minority individuals. There are lots of examples like this out there. And so the central point is the private sector is activated. There's a legacy of organizations focusing on this, and there are some shining examples in our time of organizations doing phenomenal work. With all that said, the racial wealth gap has still persisted for centuries. And in fact, it's stayed remarkably consistent over the last 30 years. And so the question then becomes, why? Why is it that the human impacts still exist and we can't close this gap? We know that you have only a 1 in 4 chance as a Black American of reaching the middle class. We know that the US economy is foregoing $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion by these wealth gaps persisting. There are organizations who are activated and who care. So why? And we set out to ask this question and try to answer it through a group of stakeholder discussions. In those discussions, we heard lots of different interesting things. And this is a word cloud that covers some of the things that we heard. Certainly there are institutional barriers, but no clear unifying agenda, lack of central coordination, high fragmentation, lack of data and accountability, inaccessible funding. A lot of different themes on this page, but the core theme that we pulled out, and you can see it in most of the things that are in the boldest and biggest font, is this lack of central coordination, a broad agenda that has clear objectives and accountability and reporting and transparency. And that brings us to this concept of community action. This concept of community action is all about tackling complex issues that require coalitions of stakeholders. These typically emerge in three archetypes. You've got interest groups that exchange ideas and thoughts on specific issues or programs in which they have common interest or passion. You've got practice groups where groups of individuals facilitate the learning and sharing of ideas to help find solutions over an extended period of time. And then you've got what I'd highlight as the action groups. These are groups that come together in a much more concrete and comprehensive way, aligned on a common goal, driving collective action, with regular convening and evaluation of progress against a shared agenda. Our research suggests that if we are to make significant progress on the wealth gap, on the income gap, on closing disparities with respect to healthcare, we need more formalized communities of action. These communities of action draw from all spheres of our economy and country: federal resources, foundations, Fortune 500, small businesses, think tanks, all coming together in this cohesive group with a core. And at this core is this idea of operating committee that helps to bring together a clear, unifying agenda. They agree on some mechanism to drive accountability and transparency. They align on what is working from taking an evidence-based approach, and where is it best for each of the different stakeholders to participate and contribute toward this common goal. In summary, to continue to make the progress that organizations like INROADS are making and even accelerate that progress, we need to build more communities of action where we prioritize areas for impact. Quality and employment and wages could be one. Align on individual and cross-organization actions across the priorities, and hold convening sessions to really advance these priorities. This community would jointly select metrics and accountability methods, would jointly align on governance and cadence, and would reconnect annually or even more frequently to share progress and best practices in a wider format. There are so many organizations from across the public, private, and social sector doing fantastic work. The opportunity is now, and the case is urgent given what we're seeing with the COVID-19 crisis and the social justice movement in this country, to come together in these more formalized communities to push forward on the critical issues that are before us. Again, I am Shelley Stewart III from McKinsey and Company. I want to send a heartfelt thank you to Forrest and the entire INROADS organization for inviting me to do this session. And I want to congratulate the organization for its transformational impact over 50 years. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Shelley, for that excellent call to action.
It's only human to strive, to stumble, to weep, to comfort, but also to believe, to reinvent, and push where no one thought possible. Because in a world of ever-growing demand and ever-evolving expectation, we believe there are some things only humans can do. Like having the imagination to envision a better future and to make it reality. The passion to be awed by nature and also to protect it. The courage to explore new frontiers and search for a better way. The empathy to recognize our differences and to overcome them. Being human takes energy, and we're using ours to create new solutions to help meet the needs of people on this planet in affordable, reliable, and ever cleaner ways. For 140 years, generations of problem solvers across the globe, with determined ingenuity, shouldering incredible responsibility, relentlessly striving to achieve the impossible. This is our challenge each day, to power the world forward and enable human progress. Only humans can make such a vision a reality. It won't be easy, but it's only human to try.